Discover the incredible moment when a black janitor exposed a millionaire CEO in just 3 moves. In the heart of a bustling downtown office tower, James could feel the dreams of his beloved daughter pressing against his chest. Every night, he swept the floors on his hands and knees, pushing aside the weight of economic inequality that clung to him like a heavy coat. As he scrubbed the boardroom tables and polished the glass, he envisioned Lila growing up without the burdens he had weathered, a bright little girl who would chase dreams without fear, but reality swirled around him like the dust motes dancing in the air. How could anyone really notice a janitor, a man whose worth was so often reduced to the status of his job? The whispers of the elite echoed down the hallways, and stories about CEO Richard filled the air with worry. The corporate giant, a figure lauded in glistening brochures, was under fire. Allegations of financial fraud threatened the livelihoods of hundreds, including James's friends, the secretaries and assistants who rarely saw him as anything other than just the janitor. One fateful evening, as he cleaned the boardroom, James's eyes landed on a hidden file slipped under a stack of papers. He pulled it out, heart racing, the breath catching in his throat. There it was, a trove of damning evidence against Richard, the kind that could shake the foundations of their community. Should he report it? A crushing wave of doubt washed over him. The fear of being dismissed, laughed at, and worst of all, retaliated against clawed at his insides. As he battled his anxiety, the warmth of community crept back into his heart. His co-workers, though wrapped in their own privilege, had shared their struggles with him, quietly voicing concern about the future. They saw the truth, what was happening to them, what was happening to him. Together, they could be a force. Before we continue, I need to let you know about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, hit that bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can drop a like, it really helps me with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. James finally found the strength within him. The next day at the shareholders' meeting would be his crucible, a chance to show the world that a janitor could topple a billionaire with just 3 powerful moves: honesty, integrity, and courage. He pictured Lila's face as the people around him prepared for a rhetoric battle. When the moment came, James stood at the edge of the podium, his heart thundering in his chest. The sharp hum of silence enveloped the room as he steadied himself. The weight of the truth surged in him, and thoughts of the countless lives at stake pushed him forward. He took a breath, ready to step into the light of justice. Would this be his moment? Would Lila see her father as more than just a janitor? All eyes were on him, anticipation burning bright in the air, as the moment stretched on, an open door to a future unknown. James took a step forward, his palms clammy against the surface of the podium. The boardroom was silent, every eye fixed on him. He could feel the weight of their scrutiny, but he didn't back down. Memories flashed before him: Lila laughing, her bright eyes filled with hope. That was the fire he needed. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice steady despite the tremors inside. "I stand before you today not just as a janitor but as a father, as a part of this community." The room shifted slightly, surprised murmurs skimming over the audience. That he could see Richard sitting at the opposite end, a look of disdain on his face. James took a deep breath, pushing through the unease. "We've all heard the rumors surrounding our CEO, Richard Block. But today, I'm here to bring facts to light." He held up the file, the edges worn from his fingers tracing the words countless times. Richard's brows furrowed, annoyance flaring. "What is that supposed to be?" he snapped, trying to reclaim the floor. James pressed on, lifting his chin. "This is proof of misconduct, financial fraud that could cost jobs. Not just mine, but hundreds of others in this building." The incredulous gasps around him fueled his courage. He was no longer just a janitor, he was a voice for those who felt silenced. "Mr. Block has been hiding this information, manipulating figures to line his pockets while the rest of us struggle." The words spilled out, raw and full of emotion. I have watched my friends watch their futures unravel while he continues to thrive in his bubble of privilege. Suddenly, a hand shot up from the back. It was Linda, the office manager, her voice trembling but resolute. James is right. We've seen the numbers. We've talked about how unfair it is. There was a ripple of agreement among the staff. The sheer power of the united voices rattled the room. Richard scoffed, but James felt the energy shifting. The dynamic was no longer just the shareholders against him. It was the powerless rising up. People were standing, whispering, and nodding their heads. Hope surged within him. I'm not afraid of losing my job anymore. I'm standing up for everyone who feels trapped by this system. He could see Linda's eyes shining, and it fueled him even further. We all deserve transparency and honesty. We deserve to be heard. The faces in the crowd began to shift, disbelief transforming into reflection. Richard's bravado faltered, and for an instant, James saw vulnerability flash across the CEO's face, a flicker of fear. Maybe this man who had lived above them all along was starting to feel the ground beneath him shake. As he concluded his statement, a twinge of uncertainty loomed inside James, but he steadied himself. You can ignore a janitor, but you cannot ignore the truth. The room fell deathly quiet, weighted with anticipation. Then, a voice rose from the back, clear and powerful. We stand with him. We stand with James. It was Roger, the head of accounting, his support cutting through the tension like a beacon. Suddenly, the boardroom erupted, waves of agreement rippling through the crowd, people voicing their support. James felt the energy explode within him. This was the moment he had yearned for. He had transcended the boundaries of his old life, igniting a collective fire that threatened to consume the very systems that upheld oppression. But amid the chaos, Richard's face darkened, as if a storm cloud had rolled in. Would he retaliate or concede? The battle was far from over. James was left standing, the air electric, the reality of what was unfolding crashing around him. Was this the breakthrough he had fought for, or the beginning of a much larger fight? The question hung in the air, thick, as everyone awaited Richard's reaction. Richard's lips pressed into a thin line, his eyes narrowing to slits. He looked like a lion backed into a corner, ready to pounce. The atmosphere in the boardroom shifted, the sense of unity that had just sparked within the employees met the unyielding solidity of their CEO. James remained rooted to the spot, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel the tumultuous emotions swirling around him. Hope, anxiety, and courage rolled together like a storm. The room was charged, each person acutely aware of the stakes. Is this what you all want? Richard's voice boomed, cutting through the chaos. You want to follow a janitor into a rabbit hole of lies and slander? You believe him over me? His words dripped with disdain, making it clear he'd write off their growing support as foolishness, but it didn't work. Instead of retreating, the crowd grew bolder. Voices joined in chorus, we believe James. We want the truth. James could hardly believe what he was witnessing. Each voice was like a candle igniting in the dark, brightening the oppressive gloom Richard had cast over them. Linda's face was flushed with determination, Roger pumping his fist as he shouted support. They were all here for something bigger than themselves, and that fire was contagious. Richard faltered, his lip quivering with restrained anger. You would compromise your careers for this farce? Trust a janitor with your fates? The derision was palpable, but it didn't deter James or the others. We're not just following him, shouted Linda, stepping forward, her voice steady and unyielding. We're standing for ourselves. For our community, for honesty and decency. Her words rang out like a declaration, and they fell on Richard like stones, each one eroding his defiance. Fine, Richard snapped, his eyes flaring with indignation. If that's what you want, then let us follow this path. But don't come crying to me when it all falls apart. James could see the veins in Richard's neck bulging, a sign of a man on the precipice of losing everything he had worked so hard to build on the backs of others. It was exhilarating and terrifying all at once. I won't regret standing up. James shouted, his voice breaking through. I'm tired of being scared. Tired of watching good people get hurt. His words felt like an anchor in the storm, steadying him in the face of chaos. A lady from the Human Resources team raised her hand. What are we gonna do, James? If we're going to fight this fight, we need a plan. Yes. Echoed another. What's our next step? In that moment, James realized their unity had formed a spark, but it needed to grow into a flame. We need to band together and gather evidence. We need to confront the truth, and we need to take it to the authorities. Hope surged through the room. He could see the fire in the eyes around him, and even Richard's sneer seemed less fierce now. What started as one man's plea was becoming a movement, raw and authentic. Yet, James knew that with every step forward, they all risked retaliation. Are you ready to fight for what is right? He asked, and they all replied, yes. But before they could celebrate this small victory, the heavy door swung open with a loud bang, and a group of executives walked in, their expressions grave. A chill swept through the room, landing on James like ice. Are you ready for the consequences of your actions? Boomed one of the vice presidents, glancing at Richard, who now looked as though he was losing control. The atmosphere thickened with tension, a sense of dread mixed with exhilaration. Would they back down or stand firm? This was the threshold they had crossed into a world of unknowns. James swallowed hard, his heart racing again. The fight was no longer just about accountability but survival in the corporate jungle. What awaited them next could change everything. Could they face the backlash that would follow? The moment felt electric. The group of executives filled the doorway, their tailored suits stark against the tension in the room, where rebellion now clashed with power. James felt the weight of their scrutiny like a spotlight burning into him. He could see the disdain etched on their faces, the clear message that they were not here to talk. What do you think this is? The vice president demanded, his voice sharp and condescending. A protest? This isn't a high school play, James. You're playing with fire, and you're going to get burned. The other executives shared glances, some looked amused, others merely irritated. Richard, hunched over and pale, seemed to shrink under the gaze of his peers. For the first time, James saw a crack in the CEO's previously impenetrable armor. But James stood his ground, breathing deeply. These were moments that defined a person. No, he replied, his voice steady. This is a stand for what's right. Not just for me, but for all of us. He gestured around the room, taking in the faces of his co-workers, each marked by determination. We want accountability. We want transparency. A scoff arose from one of the executives. Accountability? You think your little uprising changes anything? Our shareholders won't stand for this nonsense. Maybe it's time they hear the truth, Linda interjected, stepping beside James, her eyes wide with courage. You think they don't see what is happening here? You think we're afraid to take this to the media, to the streets? You're outnumbered. James felt a rush of adrenaline, riding on the strength of Linda's words, fueling the fire inside. This was more than just a corporate battle, it was about dignity. It was about respect. The vice president shifted his attention back to Richard, something like worry flitting across his features. You chose this path, Richard. Are you going to stand with this rabble? Or are you going to take control? Richard's face flushed, his previous bravado draining away. It was a pivotal moment, the top brass waiting for their CEO to make the call. Would he silence them, reassert his dominance, or would he crumble and side with the very people he had belittled? Enough. Richard barked, his voice cracking. But it came out weak, almost desperate. You do not want to do this. You'll regret it. James felt the tension crackle in the air, he knew this was it. You're the one who will regret it, he replied, steadying his breath. We aren't backing down. Not now. Not ever. The room held a breath, caught between fear and resolve. Several faces around him nodded. James could see determination sparked anew. It was a slow realization what they were doing required more than courage, it needed unity, and right then, they had that in spades, but the executives weren't done. "We'll see what consequences await," the vice president said with a smirk, clearly relishing the power he thought he still held. Then something unexpected happened. The heavy silence was shattered by a soft sound, a steady clap. At first, James thought it was a mistake, but soon, the rest of the employees followed suit, clapping harder. The noise grew, filling the boardroom with their collective acknowledgement of bravery. James's heart pounded, a mix of confusion and excitement. They were uniting behind him. Richard was now fully exposed, the last shred of authority dissipating as his face twisted into rage and denial. "You all are making a mistake," he shouted, but the clapping continued, drowning out his protest. "What happens next is up to us. Stand firm, and we will rise," James declared, his voice clear amid the storm of claps and cheers. With that, the atmosphere shifted. It wasn't just a meeting anymore, but a movement. But as disbelief faded into a hint of fear, James couldn't shake the question lingering in his mind: what would Richard do next? Would he retaliate with all the power at his disposal? Or would he collapse under the weight of his own making? The uncertainty gnawed at him like a relentless tide. As the applause faded, a new chill entered the space. What consequences were waiting just around the corner? The clapping resonated against the polished walls, a chorus of defiance echoing in the faces of the executives, who now wore expressions that ranged from irritation to outright panic. Richard, still rigid at the head of the table, paled as if the color had drained right from him. James could see the internal turmoil playing out behind his eyes, a storm of doubt battling against years of entitlement. "Enough of this charade," Richard finally shouted, desperation seeping into his tone. His gaze darted around, seeking allies among the suits standing in the doorway, but the confident stance he once held now teetered on the brink of collapse. Each silent stare from the top brass further isolated him, leaving him vulnerable. "Look, we all know how this company operates," Linda said, stepping forward with a fierceness that surprised even James. "You've built walls, Richard, walls that protect you but keep everyone else out. We're here to tear them down." Richard cast a furtive glance at the executives, as if searching for a lifeline, but found none. Disappointment twisted his features. "You think the shareholders would care about your so-called transparency? This is about profit, about power. You think they want to see weakness? Maybe what they really want is for you to be held accountable for your actions." James shot back, the ensuing silence almost dizzying. "You've directed this company like a ship sailing straight into a storm, oblivious to the damage. Storms can sink ships, and your little mutiny is just the kind of chaos that could cost everyone their jobs," the vice president sneered, crossing his arms. "You think they'll cheer for you when the financial reports hit the news?" A shiver of anxiety raced through the crowd. What if Richard did retaliate? What if this truly cost them their livelihoods? But as James looked into the eyes of his co-workers, there was something that quelled his fears, the determination burning bright amidst the uncertainty. This lament was more than just a fight, it was a statement, a testament to their shared struggle. "What we want is a future," Linda insisted. "A safe and fair workplace. We can work for profits, but not at the expense of our dignity." James felt emboldened, the tension in the room shifting again. The applause had faded, but that didn't mean their resolve had weakened. It swelled within him, pushing him forward. "Imagine if we could create a company where ethics and profits walked hand in hand. Where all voices matter. Just stop it. All of you." Richard exploded, raising his hands as if to physically ward off their words. It was a desperate move, clawing at the remnants of control that were slipping away from him. It solidified the fracture in his leadership. "You'll regret this. I'm not afraid to implement whatever consequences are necessary." The room froze again, a collective intake of breath. This was what James had feared. What was Richard capable of? Would he wield his power to clamp down harder than before? Before he could answer himself, a soft voice broke through the murmur of anxiety. It was Richard's secretary, someone who had often remained in the background, but now stepped into the open. What happens if you end up alienating everyone around you? The walls you've built won't protect you from the truth. Richard turned to her, disbelief and anger dancing across his features, but something about her calm assertiveness seemed to shatter his confused rage. James watched in awe as she continued, her voice steady, resonating with conviction. Words danced in between the tensions tighter than a drawn string on a bow. The stakes were unbearably high. But just as Richard opened his mouth to retort, another echo of applause rose, this time led by the secretary. James felt a surge of hope that perhaps even in the darkness of corporate power, there could still be light. The moment hung precariously a realization that they might not only survive but thrive. But would Richard's retaliation come, and in what form? James swallowed hard, bracing himself for what was next, every nerve alive with anticipation. What would their fight for change cost? Would it lead to a devastating backlash or a chance to truly redefine their company culture? The tension in the room thickened, an electric pulse of fear and anticipation. Richard's face twisted into a mask of rage and disbelief, but the growl of confusion was only growing louder among the executives. They had positioned themselves by his side, but an uncomfortable majority now felt uncertain, teetering on a precipice of change. What are you all clapping for? Richard snapped, his voice cracking with frustration. You think this is a joke? You're ready to jump ship for a few soft words? The secretary stood resolute, her back straight, a stark contrast to Richard's flailing command. It's not a joke, Richard. It's called hope. And you're losing it. Fast. James could feel his pulse quicken. There was something magical about that moment, the bravery in her words igniting a unity among the employees that he hadn't expected. It was as if, in that tiny yet monumental act of courage, they had found their voice, one that could shake the very foundations Richard had built his empire upon. Linda stepped forward again, solidarity aligning with her determination. It's a chance to create a better future, Richard. One where we're not just numbers on a spreadsheet or tools for your ambitions. We are people and we want you to see us that way. Quiet murmurs spread through the crowd, building a wave of courage. Each face echoed the sentiment, every glance supportive and forceful. Richard may have underestimated their resolve, but they were done standing in the shadows. Maybe you should listen, one of the men from the back dared to suggest. His voice trembled, barely above a whisper, but the fear dissolved as others began to nod in agreement, emboldened by the shifting atmosphere. Richard's glower deepened. You really think I'm going to sit here and let you tell me how to run this company? This is mine. I've toiled for everything I have. Have you? James shouted back, feeling liberated by the surge of emotion coursing through him. Have you truly earned it, or have you taken it from those who deserve better? It's time to admit that we've been complicit in a system that thrives on fear. Another gust of applause erupted, now louder, more vigorous, pushing against the constraints Richard had imposed. The tide was turning, and James could feel a sense of belonging building within him. He glanced around, everyone was leaning in. Together, they could redefine their stories. But then, crashing through the harmony, Richard bellowed, "You'll destroy this company. You'll ruin your own futures. Or maybe we'll save it," chimed the secretary, her calm voice breaking through the storm. You think your wealth will shield you? The truth is more powerful than money. And the truth is that we're stronger together. You're not invincible, Richard. The room trembled with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. Richard's walls showed cracks, vulnerable against the onslaught of truth laid bare before him. James wondered, was this it? Was this the moment everything changed? But just as hope flared, Richard clutched at the edge of his desk, his resilience beginning to slip away like sand through fingers. Fine. If it's war you want, then I'll show you what a real fight looks like. The crowd recoiled, a wave of uncertainty sweeping over them. Was this the reckoning that would lead to disaster? Don't lash out, Richard. Linda's voice rang out, but her words hung in the air, desperate yet resonant. In the silence that followed, uncertainty reigned once again. What kind of retaliation would Richard unleash? Would they be ready? As the air crackled with unspoken fears, James sensed a formidable shift in the atmosphere. The fight had just begun, but how far would Richard go to maintain his power? Suddenly, a new voice joined the fray, a low, even tone that came from the back of the room, carrying a weight that stopped everyone in their tracks. Why don't we ask the janitor? James turned. It was an unexpected ally had just arrived. Would they change the course of this battle? The room fell silent. All eyes shifted toward the back where the janitor stood, pushing a cart laden with cleaning supplies. A worn cap sat low on his brow, obscuring most of his face, but the grit in his posture radiated a quiet strength. What do you mean? Richard barked, both irritated and intrigued by this sudden interruption. The janitor stepped closer, his voice calm but unwavering. I see it all. The way you treat people here. The fear you instill daily. It's like a heavy fog so thick that the sun can't break through. But it's time someone clears the air. Richard's expression morphed from anger to bewilderment. How dare this man, seemingly so inconsequential in this high-stakes drama, challenge him? You clean floors, not boardrooms. What do you know about business? The janitor squared his shoulders, unfazed. I know that respect isn't tied to a position. You think you're above everyone else, but that's just a mask. The real power lies in how you treat others. The crowd stirred, a mix of surprise and delight. James felt a warmth spread through him. This man's words were resonating in ways that were utterly unexpected, like a breeze cutting through the stifling tension. People matter, Richard, the janitor continued, his voice steadier now, emboldened by the moment. You can't rule over hearts that are broken, and you can't build an empire on fear alone. It's a foundation made of sand. Richard's jaw tightened. He looked around and saw nods of agreement flickering among the gathered team. In that instant, he realized the janitor wasn't just speaking for himself, he was channeling the collective frustration and anger of everyone in the room. We're not asking for much, the janitor pressed on. Just a chance. A piece of the pie. A place at the table. But if you insist on ruling through threats, you're going to end up in a free fall. Richard visibly fumed, yet a hint of uncertainty crept into his eyes. How could he dismiss this man? The tide had turned with unwelcome intensity. It was no longer just a few disgruntled voices, it was a chorus. What makes you think you can even protect them? Richard shot back, his voice dripping with disdain. You don't know what's at stake. This isn't some charity, this is business. The janitor chuckled softly. You're right. This isn't charity. It's humanity. Isn't that what every great leader is supposed to understand? You've forgotten about the human side of this business, Richard. You've lost touch, and that's why you're losing control. The words hung in the air, striking a chord deeper than anyone could have imagined. Richard's mask crackled, revealing the uncertainty beneath. The executives looked at one another, their loyalties wavering. What will it take for you to understand? The janitor asked, eyes scanning the room, a spark igniting in their hearts. You can tear us down, but you will never break our spirit. But let us see how far your threats go when we stand together. The challenge was palpable. Every face reflected a mix of hope and trepidation. James felt his heart racing. This was a pivotal moment. The janitor was rallying the troops in a way Richard never anticipated. Then, as the unspoken tension coiled tightly, a sudden sound erupted, an office door slamming open. Everyone turned as Linda, her expression fierce, stepped forward, ready to add her voice to this growing resistance. Richard, you are so busy looking to protect your empire that you don't even see it crumbling beneath you. The air charged with a mix of disbelief and exhilaration. Where would this fierce confrontation lead? Would they finally see a crack in Richard's armor? In that charged moment, uncertainty swirled thick, and James knew something had shifted irreversibly. But what would Richard do next? Would this be the tipping point, or would it unleash something far more dangerous? Richard's eyes turned to Linda, fury bubbling just beneath the surface. "You have no idea what you're talking about," he spat, his voice dripping with disdain. It was a feeble attack, the words rolling off him like water from a duck's back. But even as he said it, he felt the ground beneath him loosen. The executive stared in stunned silence, weighing the shifting dynamics. It was as if they'd been holding their breath, waiting for this very moment to explode into something bigger. James felt the heat of the room rise, the tide shifting from Richard's favor to the rebels who had stood in the shadows for too long. "Look at them," the janitor implored, his calm demeanor unwavering. "Look at how they're standing beside each other. You can try to sway them with fear, but they're no longer afraid. Not anymore." Richard balled his fists, the knuckles turning white. He was losing control. The power he had wielded with an iron grip now felt fragile, like an old chandelier at risk of crashing down if someone breathed too hard. A flicker of doubt crossed his expression. The janitor saw it, and his resolve hardened. "We want a voice," the janitor announced, raising his chin defiantly. "We want to work together as a real team. We can help you make this place grow, but it needs to start with respect." Richard opened his mouth, but his voice caught in his throat. The hum of murmurs grew louder. "What is it going to be, Richard?" someone shouted from the back. It was Billy, their loyal systems analyst who had always kept a low profile. "Are you going to listen to a life spent pushing people down, or to those who have something to offer?" The question hit Richard hard. The room shifted as more and more employees began to rally behind Billy, voices growing bolder. "We want a say," cried another. "We want our work to mean something." As the rallying cries echoed throughout the room, Richard's bravado faltered. "You think you can take this from me?" he retorted, but even he could hear the tremor in his voice. The empty bravado was unraveling, exposing vulnerabilities he thought he could bury under layers of arrogance, and just like that, Linda stepped forward again. "This isn't about taking anything from you, Richard. It's about bringing this company back to life. We care about our work, don't we, everyone?" A chorus of affirmations followed, affirming that passion for their jobs could rise above the petty grievances. James felt his heart swell with renewed hope. A crack in Richard's fortress was forming, Richard's brow furrowed, his mind racing. For every piece of rebellion he had faced, he had always had the upper hand. But now he was on shaky ground, and it terrified him. "You think you can just change everything?" he barked. "You have no idea what this company is built on." But the janitor wasn't backing down. "Maybe it's time to rebuild it. You've built an empire on fear, and that empire is crumbling. We can rebuild together, but only if you let go of that fear." Every eye in the room was focused on Richard, a heavy silence consuming the air. As he glanced around at familiar faces, those he had ignored, belittled, even ridiculed, something deep within him began to shift. There was a yearning to be part of something bigger, something meaningful. But was he ready to let go of the fear he had relied on for so long? In that moment, uncertainty rippled through him. He could either crush this insurrection or find a new way forward. The choice hung before him, and as the weight of it settled in, James could almost taste the possibility of change. But at the edge of that possibility, Richard clenched his fists again, preparing a counterattack. "You think this is over? I can make things even worse," he warned, a storm brewing behind his eyes. The stakes were higher than anyone realized. This confrontation was far from over. Would Richard double down on his threats, or could a spark of reason ignite? As tension crackled like electricity in the air, the next move in this unfolding drama would determine everything. Richard's heart raced, each pulse echoing like a drum through the silence of the room. The uncertainty crept into every thought, battling with his instinct to lash out. "Make things worse?" he repeated, his voice faltering. An unexpected wave of self-doubt crashed over him. Was he really prepared to go down with the ship, to lose everything in a final act of defiance? The room waited. The collective breath of the employees felt palpable, thick with anticipation as they weighed Richard's next move. Across the space, Linda's eyes shimmered with resolve. The janitor stood beside her, an unassuming figure who had somehow become the embodiment of hope for the others. James could feel the tension in the air, hanging like the heavy remnants of a storm. "You can still do the right thing," he urged silently, willing Richard with every fiber of his being to hear the truth echoing around him. With every moment that passed, it was clear the executives were moving toward the realization that change could no longer be deferred. Billy spoke up again, voice steady. "This isn't just about leadership. It affects all of us. If we're going to grow, we need to feel seen. We need our share in this." Richard's eyes flicked to Billy, narrowing. "You think I'm supposed to just roll over?" His defiance was a thin veneer over a crumbling facade. The notion of roll over had never been in his playbook. But he wasn't sure he could keep up the charade any longer. "We don't want you to roll over," Linda interjected, her tone unwavering. "We want you to stand up, Richard. Stand up for something good. For us. For this company that could be great again." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Their voices intertwined, growing louder as they proclaimed their demands for respect and collaboration. For each encouragement, Richard flinched, the walls of his power seeming to cave in. Then, with a deep breath, Richard took a step forward, driven by something he had rarely allowed himself to feel: vulnerability. "What if I tried?" he ventured, the words spilling out before he could stop them. "What if I considered your ideas?" The room froze, as if they had all collectively drawn a breath. Did he really mean it? Could the man who had once ruled with fear now stand before them, willing to listen? "There's no road map, Richard," the janitor replied, his calm demeanor radiating warmth. "But we can create one together. It's a step, not a leap." Another silence fell, different this time, rippling with cautious hope. This was uncharted territory. Richard was caught between pride and possibility, teetering on the edge of something monumental. But he couldn't shake the sensation of fear wrapping itself around him like a vice. He started, glancing at the faces surrounding him, eager, hungry for change, but their hopeful expressions felt like a weight on his shoulders. "I'll think about it." A rumble of disappointment echoed through the group, quickly replaced by whispered encouragements. The fight for a voice wasn't over, but Richard clung to that flicker of resolve. As he watched his world blend into chaos, part of him wondered if it could really be rebuilt. The janitor smiled gently. "Thinking is the first step, Richard. Just remember, you can't go back to how things were. The risk of losing is what creates true leaders." James absorbed it all, heart swelling for the flicker of change, the tension easing into something hopeful. But as Richard remained rooted in uncertainty, a chilling thought broke through. Was this all just talk? Would he merely retreat into his old fears once the noise died down? James clenched his jaw, anxious for what lay ahead. As the critical moment loomed, Richard took a deep breath, locking eyes with Linda. Did he have the courage to take that leap? A decision was hanging in the air, and whether he jumped or stayed would echo beyond this room. Could he finally break free from the chains of his own making? The answer, for now, remained tantalizingly out of reach. Richard's gaze darted around the room, landing on each face filled with urgency and anticipation. The whisper of hope was palpable, he could almost feel the desire for change radiating from his employees. There was an understanding in the air that went beyond the boardroom banter, the scent of rebellion, of claiming what belonged to them. He took a shaky breath, caught between fear and an unfamiliar sense of longing. In that moment, the walls of his meticulously crafted fortress began to crumble. "I don't want to be the villain of this story," he finally admitted, his voice shaky yet resolute. "But I don't know how to lead in a different way." The room went silent, the employees leaning in, their eyes bright with encouragement. It was time to bridge the gap, if he stumbled just enough, perhaps they could all fall forward together. What if we formed a committee? Richard suggested, his brows furrowing in thought. One made up of employees from different departments. I'm willing to listen to your ideas. But you'll have to give me the truth as it is, no sugarcoating. A ripple of surprise washed over the room. Was this really happening? James felt his heart swell with cautious excitement. And we'll hold you accountable, Linda said, taking a step forward, the leadership shining in her eyes. No more empty promises. We want real change. Richard nodded slowly, the weight of every gaze upon him a testament to the power of unity. I can do that, he said, the tremor in his voice replaced by newfound determination. If this partnership is going to work, we're all going to have to give our best. I'll strive for transparency, and together, we can rebuild not just this company but the very culture that surrounds it. The crowd erupted into cheers, a wave of joy washing over them. There were tears, laughs, and embraces, but amidst the ebullience, the quiet powerful truth rang out: this was a pivotal moment, one where hope defied the odds. James felt a mix of pride and relief. This was more than he had ever imagined, a transformation not just for him, but for everyone seeking a better life. That in the corners of the room, whispers of change turned into fervent conversations, ideas bubbling to the surface. Richard, looking more human than ever, surveyed his employees anew, an understanding dawning in his eyes. For the first time, he saw them as individuals, not just cogs in a machine running his empire. Let us schedule our first meeting, Linda suggested, determination woven through her words. And let us decide what our priorities will be. This is how we create accountability not just for you, Richard, but for all of us. The executives exchanged glances, their expressions shifting from skepticism to tentative agreement. Perhaps, just perhaps, they were ready to embrace the changes ahead too. As the first sparks of collaboration began to glow, James stood at the heart of it all, his mind drifting to Lila. I did it, he whispered to himself, gratitude bubbling up. He could now envision a world where she would thrive, her future not tarnished by the struggles he endured. The meeting wrapped with a tentative sense of hope. As the employees filed out, sharing camaraderie and laughter, James felt the pulse of something powerful shift within him. He was no longer merely a janitor, but part of a team championing for something greater than themselves. In those final moments, Richard lingered at the doorway, watching everyone depart. He could feel the heartbeat of change resonating in his chest. Thank you, he called out, his voice unexpectedly strong. Thank you for trusting me to be part of this. The words hung in the air like a promise, one that would guide them into uncharted territories together. James walked away with a full heart, radiating hope. The fight was far from over, but they had crossed a threshold toward a more equitable future. They were bound by shared purpose, the promise of reclaiming their lives, their rights. This was only the beginning of their journey, and if you felt that spark of hope, that fire of transformation, now is the moment to show your support. Subscribe immediately to the channel to not miss the next exclusive stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm and keep the positivity flowing. Comment below your reactions and feelings about the ending. We want to hear from you. Share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this transformation. Don't wait not even one more second. Only true fans understand the importance of supporting this channel through these actions.